Sure. Sorry about that. I jumped off hoping that maybe that would change it. So my name's Dusty Downey, and I'm the conservation ranching lead for Audubon Rockies bird-friendly beef certification. We've got quite a few folks on the call that are part of that certification, and one I would like to be happy to highlight here as we kind of move forward is Lance and Lisa Wheeler, who run the Rafter W Ranch. They're been part of the program for quite a while now, and have just really been folks that have been really important in our program, and also the world of conservation. And so I'll let Lance talk a little bit about where they're at, and what we're trying to do as Audubon with them in order to kind of promote soil health on pasture lands in particular. There's been a lot of discussion of crops, and I think a discussion on the importance of soil health when it comes to pastures and rangeland is really critical to what we're all trying to do in the world of conservation and soil health. So with that, Lance, I will turn it over to you to give some introductions on the Rafter W.
Thank you, Dusty. You can see there that this is the ranch. We are located in East Central Colorado, Elbert County, Colorado, about 5,800 feet. And we really usually get about 14 to 16 inches of rainfall a year. We are 100% rangeland, so there's no plantings of any type. We raise grass-fed, grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured poultry, and eggs. All of the things that we produce here are marketed directly to the public on the Front Range, and even in some cases outside the state. And so we've been here less time than a lot of the other folks you've spoken to. We arrived on this location in 2014, and at that point had been through holistic management education, and committed to applying that principle to this property. And so what we have done is sectioned this ranch into 7 separate pastures that are then subdivided into smaller paddocks. And at any point in time, in any given year, we may have up to 500 paddocks. And so in the interest of facilitating our stock densities and those kinds of things, and how that feeds the soil. And so we committed to that. And when we got here, we had some areas that were very open. Our soil profiles will range from very sandy places in our like riparian areas to our traditional Colorado clay in our flatter grounds, up to our upland areas where it may be a little loamier. And so the management varies across those spaces. But when we got here, the sand in the riparian area looked like a beach. There was literally nothing growing on it. And so we just committed to doing those things. And over time, and the difference, I think, and Dusty would probably concur, that with just rangeland, since we're not planting and doing those things, this process has taken a little bit of time. And so it wasn't really until the 3rd year of application to this space that we began to see the positive impacts of a conservative or a conservation style ranching model. And we began to see plant communities fill in the sand. We began to see more species diversity across the ranch, grasses that arrived that we had not planted. We just tapped into the soil or the seed bank by adapting our range management to facilitate that. And I kind of liken that to what you might consider the field of dreams. If you build the things that need to be built into it, they will come, they will show up for you, and they'll do what you need them to do. They just need the opportunity to get that done. And I guess, we can measure soil health, but at the end of the day, for us, it really has become about diversity, right? That's how we know the soil is improving, in the physical sense. You can literally see it above ground. And so, we're enjoying those benefits, right? Now, but to be fair, it is a work in progress. And somewhere in the last, few years, probably 4 years ago, is when we encountered Audubon. We had always been interested. We're birders, and we have always enjoyed those things, but didn't know there was a ranching connection to that. And what they did was help us develop a broader habitat management plan, not just a grazing plan, but a habitat management plan. And so we went ahead and delved into that. And what it has done is helped us to be more cognizant of the things that are on our landscape besides just our plant species and our livestock and where they happen to be at any point in time. And the benefits, I think, to that form of conservation is that you see their overall benefit to your landscape. And what we found was it wasn't just birds, well, the birds important. Other animals showed up as part of the process, right? We now have resident antelope, right? And more deer, more wild turkey, spending time in the riparian areas, things of that nature that we had not anticipated because we were focused really on our rangeland birds, our meadowlarks and our nighthawks and the things that like to live on the ground. So, and Max, could you move to the next slide, please? And this has become really one of the driving forces, right? Is that the things that connect life. And so we're talking about soil conservation, but we're talking about the connector of lives and how we're connected to it, right? And if we divorce ourselves from these spaces, what the negative impact is to the broader context of our society and our communities, right? And in subsequent slides, you'll see some kids, right? Our grandkids and some of our kids. And I think that while we talk about, when we talk about soil conservation and soil health, and we talk about birds and other wildlife, we're talking about their next generations, right? Part of our vision here is to try and instill this vision into our children and our grandchildren, because without that, there won't be a future for the soil or the other species that inhabit our landscape. And so, we want, I think, Max asked me like what our success and failures have. For me, it's just been a net success, right? There's been trial and error, and there's been some challenges, yes, right? But that is part of the learning process. And a wise man once told me, if you're not trying hard enough, if you're not failing at something, right? You have to go out there and you have to put yourself out and try it. And if it doesn't work, then you make a correction. Right. And so, but Audubon's been tremendous help to us because they've also provided wildlife biologists to come out, do bird and forage inventories, the things that help us understand what's there, what's doing well, what's not doing well, how do we adapt to that, and those kinds of things. And so we're grateful for that input and that help that Audubon's come along with. And they allow us to market our product with an Audubon label on it. People really want to know, what the certifications are and what they mean. They can go look at those things and say, hey, this matters to me, and those kinds of things. I prefer to buy from someone that does those things, that follows those protocols, over maybe somebody else, right? So, we're grateful for those things too. And we can move to the next slide, please. So you'll see these cattle here, right? In the growing season. This one of our sons here, Brett. We'll be setting up miles worth of polyelectric fence. The beautiful thing about polyelectric fence is it's flexible, right? And we've become very attuned to looking for things, not just moving the cattle where we want them to be and where they need to be, but what else is in their space that we might want to fence around. And I could not find the photograph, a couple photographs, but we've found nighthawk eggs on the soil surface. We found meadowlark nests, and we just take that poly fence and we go around them, right? The other parts of the ranch may be a deferral area where those birds can be, but even where the cattle are, we can still manage for our wildlife that happens to be there and protect those nests, during the nesting season. And that, I think, yields a lot of benefits. And for me, this is anecdotal, but in 2019, we had an enormous hailstorm. And we went out to check everything, right? Cattle, sheep, and all the other things that were out there in the middle of the storm. But what we found was just a ton of dead birds, it just was merciless on them. And so, we've made a concerted effort to make sure that we're not further interrupting their nests during the nesting season. So hopefully we can help repopulate, those things that are, important part, what have become a really important part of our ranch for us. And Dusty, you want to jump in about, what Audubon's doing in terms of resource and landscape management?
Sure. I think, Lance, thank you for that. Audubon is working hard kind of on a different scope than a lot of conservation groups when it comes to ranch lands and rangelands, primarily the fact that obviously Audubon looks through the land through the lens of the birds. And obviously there are lots and lots of wonderful people on this call right now that are very interested in the soil health. And so one of the things Audubon's trying to do is, we started with our bird surveys and our vegetation surveys and kind of working our way down the ladder as opposed from the base up. We kind of want to meet in the middle with the data and the information that we gather from soil health, and then meet that and match that up, with what we're finding in terms of vegetation and bird health. And so there are, lots of great anecdotal stories out there, as Lance was saying. But what we're trying really hard to do is to bolster our monitoring and our data collection along that. So we've started doing, this year, we're going to start doing pretty intensive soil health monitoring on all of the ranches that are in the program. Some of them just are going to get simple Haney tests. Others are going to get a little bit more in-depth testing. But really, it all comes down to Audubon working with producers to help make good management decisions. And ultimately, those management decisions should not have a negative impact on production. We want to make sure that those management decisions meet up both ways, where that conservation practice, as well as an increase in production, really helps incentivize for producers to do what they're doing. And so the Audubon seal is nice for a little bit of an incentive. There's folks out there garnering a little bit of a premium for that. But really, that production value is also going to be important. And so we're trying to study the different grazing rotations that are effective on different ranches and different soils and different parts of the area, because we know it's ranch to ranch. And so yeah, Audubon's really excited to continue to work. We've been doing monitoring on different ranches for a little over 7 years now, and we look forward to continuing that. So,
Max, could you go to the next slide, please? This is what we talk about when we're talking about management, and grazing management in our mind is a huge part of conservation management. And so, you're going to see this, it's electric polywire. As I said, there will be miles of this set up during the growing season, and it allows us to keep our livestock exactly where they need to be and where they should be at any point in time. And it allows them to not go back and also, damage the forages behind them, right? And we will move them up to 3 times a day, right, to manage the forages and grasses, right? And that provides habitat, but it also helps carbon capture and the things that feed the soil food web, below the surface. And so, we are leaving those things behind. We do not use chemical wormers or any other chemical with the livestock, so that the manure that they leave behind is digested by the microbes, bugs, and the things that come along behind that, which is also feeding our soil. So we invested in this thing. It is holistic management is labor intensive. Some people call it, Jim Garish, I believe, management intensive grazing, and it is, right? But the benefits, the net benefits to the soil and the ecosystem are tremendous. And so there are some new systems out there. We were talking earlier about incentivizing people to switch their management practices and those kinds of things. There are now some systems for ranchers or people that are running livestock to facilitate this process. It's a little bit less manual than it might otherwise, have been in the past. And that there's some benefit to that. I think as well, in terms of incentivizing, on the labor side and reducing the labor side. But in any event, this is what we do because we're committed to the soil. And this is the next generation. This is our oldest grandson. And when he's not in school during the school year, he's out here helping us and learning why these things matter, so that when it's his time, he can carry this forward. And hopefully by the time he's that age, there will be many, many more people involved in this. Right now, in our geographic location, there are very few people committed to this type of management. Although we do get a lot of questions. I have some very good friends that ranch in the conventional sense that want to know what all that wire is about and why are we doing what we're doing. But there hasn't been maybe necessarily the impetus for them to move that direction. I think because I think Mr. Faltzgraf said earlier, we do certain things because it's easy, right? And so we're still doing some of that. But this is what, this is what we're trying to do, is create a generational vision for conservation, for health of landscapes, and really for us to provide nutrient dense and healthy food to the people that come off of these things. And the healthier our soil becomes, the healthier our forages are, the healthier the people will be. Next slide, please. We've talked about managements on landscapes for other things. So that might be weeds or those kinds of things, right? So we are a zero spray, zero chemical operation. And so this is part of our pastured poultry, if anybody's familiar with Joel Salatin's style of management on those things. But we will take these chickens to areas that might be have a few more weeds and those kinds of things, and allow them to do what chickens do to weeds. And then leave behind some really high quality organic nitrogen. And I think he also said, Mr. Faltzgraf, how quickly chicken sells. We can raise 600 chickens at a time. They'll be gone in less than 2 months. But we're trying to use our livestock and those kinds of things that are going to provide a net benefit to the soil to also manage the other things that we don't necessarily want in our landscape, without having to add an additional input to it or any chemical. Next slide, please. This is my tools of the trade photograph, right? This is Brett again, but this is what it is. It's not terribly sexy if you're a cowboy, right? But this makes all the difference, right? We want to see our forages be this tall, right? And we want to see those kinds of things. The net benefit, that we saw, we talk about drought years, at least for part of last year, we had some green grass. And a lot of places it never did get green. And so we did eventually, to be fair, in honesty, we browned off, because it just didn't rain. And so you have to make those decisions. And so in interest of the health of the landscape and the range, all of those cattle, sheep and everything, we pulled them off, right? They're not out there on that range, so that we can come off of this winter, hopefully into spring, and see those things recover. And they won't be back out until we're satisfied that grass and the other forages are ready for their presence. And it's going to help us maintain some forage cover for our bird species in the nesting season during May and June. Max had asked me about resources. What resources do we use? Education, right? So for rangeland management, I can't speak highly enough about holistic management. We're very passionate about that. And anybody that hasn't, I would encourage you to at least explore that. We have worked with NRCS. We have some phenomenal people in our NRCS office, in the Double L office in Simla. who have provided a lot of help, with understanding, especially when we first arrived here, what's not here that should be, those kinds of things, and then other things that we built in from stock watering systems and those kinds of things to facilitate this management style. If we happen to be in a space where we don't have water close to them, we have a mobile watering system that we built. That moves with the cattle, so the cattle do not have to traverse and trample or compact the ground to get back to a central watering point. And so, we'll take that onto the ranch road, take it, fill it, bring it back to them, so they don't have to traverse that landscape that far. And we're finishing meat, so it helps us that they're not walking off weight to get to water. Right? We're going to have a nice fat cattle when we're done. And the other things we're doing, like right now with resources, one of the things that our landscape currently is missing is the ability to capture water higher on the landscape. And Audubon's working with us on a grant process to facilitate that, so that we can put in some key line structures higher on our landscape to improve our hydrology further up the landscape and reduce runoff, right? We can capture that. It accomplishes several things for us. Hydrology is principally, but it's also going to help us with bird habitat because everything needs water, and the birds that are further up in the landscape aren't experiencing that. They have to travel certain distances, and when they're nesting, that's a pretty good distance from a nest to get to water, right? And so, we're looking to do some of those things to improve not just their habitat, but our landscape and the water and our soil profile higher on the landscape. And so we're grateful for their efforts there, because truth is, writing grants and those kinds of things while you're ranching and those kinds of things can take a lot of time, and they've done a phenomenal job in assisting us with that effort.
Lance, we only have time maybe for one or two questions. One that's in the chat is, do you ever need to buy supplemental feed for your cattle, perhaps in the winter?
Yes, we absolutely do. They're on hay as we speak. But they to be fair, this year we pulled them off in September, and they have been on hay since September, and that was a range management decision.
Any other questions?